A lot of game designers spend a lot of time writing game design documents. And to their shock and horror, a lot of people from the development team, be it artists or be it programmers, hate reading game design documents. This creates a conflict that you have spent so many hours writing and refining a game design document, and you somehow feel like every time you go back to the team, they are making a different version of the game, or they haven't really understood the things you have put down in the game design document in spite of you repeating that again and again. This is a normal phenomenon. It happens in almost every studio. As a designer, what can you do to make this process better? Now, first off, we have to start with this whole idea that people are inherently busy. They might look at your game design document, they might even be reading it from time to time, but to expect them to remember everything in that, to expect them to understand it on a weekly basis, that is asking too much. Everyone who's making a game or a product is busy with their own tasks. They are doing their own R&D. So while your game design document might be well intentioned, it needs to be broken down into several different documentation types. And here are some things you can do to better communicate your larger idea. So the first thing I like to do is I like to keep it very specific and I like to keep it very brief. And what I do is I build a creative brief. This creative brief may be about 10 to 15 slides at maximum, and that goes through the whole high concept of the game that we are trying to create. Why we are trying to create that game, what are inspirations behind it, what's the proposed art style behind it, are there similar games to this, what is innovative about the game we are trying to create. This has to be easily digestible by your team, so you don't want to kind of have a meeting which is 2 hours long and make it into a brainstorming session. This is essentially your pitch deck, which covers your core gameplay loop, it covers your art direction, it covers some of your risks and mitigations, but overall your high concept of the game you are trying to create. Based on this, there will be a lot of question answers that will be asked, and it will actually make you think whether that core gameplay loop works or not. This is just a starting point so that everyone understands the vision of what you're trying to go towards. A good example is when Christopher Nolan was making the movie Dark Knight, he actually got a lot of crew members to come in and watch Blade Runner. And the goal was to make everyone in the crew understand the kind of movie they are trying to create. This is what a high concept document or an early pitch document will do for your team. It will allow them to understand the kind of game you're trying to create. If you have worked with me, you know I'm a big fan of mood boarding. Mood boarding really helps me break the game down into different aspects, especially visually. What are the thematic inspirations for the game? What are the color inspirations? What are the related experiences in different media, be it books, be it movies that we are borrowing from? This also helps me communicate really well, especially to the art team, in breaking down games into different segments, breaking down levels into different segments. However, doing mood boarding together really helps the entire team to move towards that singular vision of the visual identity of the game. What we are trying to figure out is, from a visual point of view, how does the game stand out? Are we borrowing from the right sources? Are we making sure that our inspirations remain inspirations and do not kind of lean into a very plagiarized version or just a copycat version of something that already exists out there? Mood boarding in itself is skill. Mood boarding requires you to segment different aspects of the game's visual theme into different corners and then be able to communicate to your team properly in terms of what is it that you want to achieve, what is it that you want the players to feel when they look at your game visually. Now, another document that I use is called a treatment document. This is something I learned from films. Films always have a treatment document, and think of this as something that is an evolved version of your pitch document. The treatment document goes a lot more into design, it goes into system design, it goes again into the core gameplay, but now breaking it down into systems. It also takes from the mood board that you have created and goes into the visual themes of the game, but now we are narrowing down bit by bit. We are also looking at what will be the engagement factors, what will be the pillars of gameplay, because by now, maybe about 3 to 4 months have passed, and you kind of have created a small prototype and you are starting to understand what the game is all about. A treatment doc is an advanced pitch doc, but it's more for the internal team to understand how you're going to build this world in a way which has certain pillars which you're going to focus on. For example, what are your artistic pillars in terms of the visual look, in terms of thematics, in terms of just the sound and music design too? What are your game design pillars? You can't have everything in a game, that just makes it a bit too noisy. So what are the core themes that you're going to focus on? You start refining this in a treatment document and bring it back to the team. Now you might be thinking that what's the need of a treatment document? We have done mood boarding and we have also done the earlier pitch documentation, and by now you have probably also done some game design documentation. Well, human nature being the way it is, you will soon realize when you're working in a game development team that you have to over communicate day in and day out. It's not simply as easy to create documents, have a meeting with the team, and tell them, hey, refer to this on a chat. You have to spend time with the team, whether it's face to face, if you're in different regions, setting up meetings with them, making sure that you're following up every week. It's very easy to get distracted in a production workflow, and your job as a designer is to make sure everything is on track. Speaking of prototyping, it is important that you have some level of experience in softwares where you can prototype things. It need not be polished, it need not be perfect, but it can be functional. Try to do some level of prototyping to express your ideas clearly, not just to the development team but also to your stakeholders. Just prototyping something in Blender or using a game engine like Unreal Engine or Unity will help prevent that friction from growing or escalating, wherein team members don't really understand what your vision or what your goals are. Of course, as a designer, you might have a limited scope up to which you can prototype, and at certain points you might need the engineers to step in, and that is completely fine. But just having the skill to put a 3D world quickly together, to put a very simple prototype quickly together, and telling people, hey, play this. What do you think about this idea? What do you think about this gameplay mechanics that I'm thinking of? You will notice that it will get a lot more people invested in your game and invested in your idea, because now they feel they're a part of what you are creating. Prototyping is also extremely helpful because a lot of times when we just rely on documentation, what ends up happening is everyone's version of what you're creating may be very different. But when you start prototyping something or building something in a 3D world or in a game engine, now things are starting to get real. Also, it's really helpful to prototype because you get more critical about your own idea. Something that looked great in document might not translate as well in prototype or when you start playing it. That kind of shows you your blind spots in the development process. So learning simple prototyping tools, learning how to build certain things in a game engine is extremely helpful and will only help you as a designer. Lastly, game development is an extremely iterative and an extremely excruciating process. It is not as glorious or as easy or even not as excitable as it may seem. Real game development, when you make something that's good and ship it, is a very frustrating process. It's full of ups and downs. So there are times where you'll be extremely excited about what you're shipping, what you're doing. But most of the time, especially during the middle of the development, it will be just rigor. It will be day in and day out of doing the same thing. A lot of times it will be boring work. A lot of times it will be work where you are not seeing the path forward. You don't know what you're working towards, and that is fine. This is where a designer's job becomes even more critical. You need to make sure that you communicate with your team regularly. You cannot be a WhatsApp designer or a Teams designer, which means that you just drop in messages on Teams and WhatsApp and expect the people to know what's in your head. I have met so many designers who are proficient, extremely proficient technically, extremely proficient maybe in certain aspects of game design, but their communication is extremely weak. And what this leads to is eventually when you want to get promoted, this might come back and bite you in the ass. So understanding how to communicate with artists, understanding how to communicate with programmers, with sound designers, with stakeholders throwing in a little bit of business development in there can really be a big boost to your career as a designer. So, hopefully, these tips actually help you to better refine your design documentation and to break it down into stages as opposed to having a very big game design document, which will largely never work.